Hi there! As Halloween is almost upon us, I thought today we could take a look at how one of Nintendo's spookiest series, Luigi's Mansion, came to be. These games stand in stark contrast to the bright, upbeat Mario adventures that Nintendo usually produce. So how did this offbeat idea become a reality? And why was a sequel produced 12 years later? Well, let us find out as we journey through Luigi's Mansion's development history. It was the late 90s and Nintendo had just begun developing a brand new home console, the GameCube. This new console would be far more powerful than any console before it, and Nintendo wanted a launch title that could show off this power to the world. A team was assembled to develop this new game, comprising of Hideki Kono as director and Tadashi Sugiyama as design director, with veterans Takashi Tezuka and Shigeru Miyamoto producing. The team knew they wanted to make something different, something that would help the GameCube stand out from not only its competitors' consoles but also Nintendo's own. They didn't want to create just another 3D platformer, Mario 64 2 or something like that, so they decided to go in a completely different direction. To contrast the large open world of Mario 64, they went with an enclosed Japanese-style ninja house for the setting. But what would the player actually do in this house? Well, the team thought about how a child explores all the different rooms of a dollhouse. They used this as the basis of their idea. The player would explore the rooms of the house, kind of like a dungeon in a Zelda game. However, although the team wanted to do something different from usual, the game did have to sell. As this was to be the main launch title of the GameCube, they decided to cast Mario as the protagonist. It seemed only natural. Now to get to work on the graphics. Yes, the graphics were being developed at this very early stage, as showing off the GameCube's superior graphical capabilities was one of the aims of this game. The team wanted to have crisp shadows that were dynamically rendered, rather than the static shadows from the N64 games that came before it. Since the GameCube was being developed at the same time as this game, the team was able to make many requests for technical capabilities to be added to the system. Many of these made it into the final version of the console. One of which was a new lighting engine added to the graphics chip, which made the lighting and the shadows that the team wanted possible. As the team got to work trying out this new engine, they realised they preferred a slightly darker look, featuring more shadows than in their original design. That's when they decided they should switch out the Japanese-style house for more of a haunted mansion. Yes, now the idea was coming together, a game where you explore a haunted mansion. Because said mansion would be filled with ghosts, they decided they needed a protagonist with a more cowardly personality, so Mario was replaced with Luigi. A mansion and a Luigi. Luigi's Mansion had been born. So the team had a mansion full to the brim with ghosts, but now they needed a central mechanic, some way for the player to interact with the ghosts. Well, when confronted with an evil force, the natural thing to do is to vanquish it, right? Luigi would rid the mansion of its ghosts. But how? Well, after much deliberation, the team settled on a mechanic where the player would suck up the ghost with a vacuum-like contraption. From the outset, they wanted to use 2 analog sticks. This would allow much more control over Luigi's actions, and add more of an element of skill to catching ghosts. Although the team knew this control scheme would be a little tricky at first, they also knew that mastering it would be very satisfying. This choice was not without contention, however, and the team did try out a simpler control scheme. Eventually though, the dual-stick control scheme won out. However, many testers of the game found the C-stick uncomfortable to use, especially for long periods of time. Because of this, the team requested that the stick be made wider and more comfortable. Just like with the graphics chip, Luigi's Mansion ended up shaping the GameCube itself. When asked about this control scheme, director Kono later stated, "The game may be a little difficult to control when you start, but it eventually becomes very easy. That was our goal." Now, the improved lighting wasn't the only graphical effect the team wanted to show off. The GameCube could render fire and other atmospheric effects far better than the N64. They used their tests of these effects as the basis for the fire, water and ice mechanics in the game. This time it was the GameCube's superior graphics engine that influenced the game. That isn't to say that the graphical effects in the game were easy to program, however. The dust effect, for example, was originally a fixed animation that looked the same every time, but it wasn't very interesting to look at, so the team decided to implement a dynamic dust system where the amount of dust would vary based on the level of activity in a room. One of the programmers worked on this dust system for 6 months. Now, for the music, veteran Nintendo composer Kazumi Totaka was enlisted, along with composer Shinobu Tanaka as well. Kazumi Totaka is a bit of an unsung hero in my opinion, having worked on Animal Crossing, Mario Paint, Link's Awakening, and many, many more. For this game's soundtrack, he and Tanaka decided to make heavy use of a musical technique called leitmotif. This is where a character, location or situation is associated with a musical theme. In this case, that would be the mansion and its theme. They composed this theme pretty early on in development, but deciding on its instrumentation was a challenge. Originally, they went with a very synthesizer-y arrangement. While the melody and chords were the same as in the final games, it had a very different feel to it. Here, take a listen. For most of development, this was going to be used as the music, but late in development, the audio team started to feel that this music wasn't very fun, so they decided to completely rework the audio system so that the game's soundtrack was adaptive. When Luigi was in an area he had already completed, he would calmly whistle the game's theme. When he was outside, a harp would play the theme, conveying a grandiose feeling to match the grandness of the mansion itself. When he entered a room with ghosts in it, the ghosts would sing the game's theme. And when he was in a corridor with ghosts in it, he would hum the theme with a grand orchestral accompaniment. As you can see, or rather hear, the game's soundtrack smoothly changed to reflect the mood of the game, which made the scary parts seem scarier and the urgent parts much more urgent. Another element that was added late in development was the Mario sound effect. I say effect, effects would be more appropriate. Let me elaborate. So the game was nearing completion, and then the team realised the A button was completely unused other than talking to characters and opening doors. The A button, the largest button by far on the GameCube controller, was barely used at all. The team hurriedly tried to think of a purpose for this button, something that would add to the experience without changing the, at this point, carefully fine-tuned gameplay. Then, one of the developers had an idea. What if pressing A would cause Luigi to call out to Mario? It wasn't intrusive, and it didn't change the gameplay at all, and in fact it actually added to Luigi's character, making him seem more afraid and more human. Now, why effects? Well, if you've played the game, you're sure to have noticed that there are a few different ways in which Luigi calls out to his brother, depending on his level of health, among other factors. All in all though, there are around 30 different Mario shouts, ranging from casual yoo-hoo Mario! To deranged scream Mario! That is attention to detail. You might be surprised to think the team almost left one of the buttons unused. Well, that's not actually true. They actually almost left 2 unused. Shigeru Miyamoto was testing the game late in development when he noticed that the B button was also completely unused. However, he came up with a use for it almost straight away, turning on and off the flashlight. What? In early versions of the game, there was no way of turning off the flashlight? Yeah. It seems strange considering how essential it is to the gameplay of the final version, but originally Luigi's torch was on all of the time, wherever he pointed it. Miyamoto's idea not only added tactility to the flashlight, but it greatly improved the mechanic of catching ghosts, allowing the player to turn off the flashlight, sneak right up to a ghost, and then BAM! Surprise them with a beam of light. And with that, development was finished. The schedule had been quite tight at times, but design director Sugiyama managed to cram in all the ideas he had. And so the game and accompanying cube were released unto the world. The reception was, well, mixed. critics highly praised the graphics and said they enjoyed the gameplay, but were very negative about the game's length, or rather lack of it. It could be beaten in 6 hours, which is pretty short. Sales were also not great. 3.3 million copies certainly doesn't sound bad, but compared to Mario 64's 11 million copies? Yeah. Nintendo took this as a sign to retire the Poltergust, and there were no more Luigi's Mansion games for the time being. In 2009, Nintendo were in the early stages of developing their new handheld console, the 3DS. This new console was to be the successor to the DS, and, as its name would imply, it would have stereoscopic 3D built right into it. Now, during the development of Luigi's Mansion, Nintendo had tried out a stereoscopic 3D mode. However, it was eventually scrapped as players would have to buy expensive 3D equipment for their televisions in order to use it. So, with their new console coming with 3D built in, Nintendo decided it was the perfect time for Luigi's Mansion to receive a new entry. However, at the time, Nintendo were kind of busy with the whole launching a new console thing, so they chose to outsource development to a third-party developer. But who? Well, eventually they decided on Canadian development studio Next Level Games, who they had previously worked with to develop Punch-Out for the Wii. At the time though, the studio were in the middle of a different project for Nintendo. One day, during a video conference, producer Kensuke Tanabe suddenly started to mime a drum roll with his hands and announced, "You're going to be making Luigi's Mansion 2!" Next Level Games were shocked. They immediately stopped development on their current project and started development on this new game. Next Level Games sound director Chad York stated, "I'm in 7th heaven." And so development began on Luigi's Mansion 2. The structure for the game's development was unusual, to say the least. Nintendo are known for their incredibly high standards, so they kept close watch on the team. Nintendo developer Yoshihito Ikebata would supervise them, and every 2 weeks he would meet with Shigeru Miyamoto, who would give at times cryptic advice on the game's direction. He would often refer to TV shows he had watched, for example, which left Ikebata in a slightly difficult situation. Telling the development team about Japanese television wouldn't really help them, so he tried to help them relate by discussing similar scenes from English movies and TV shows instead. Now, this might all sound a little dubious, but the team found the advice very helpful. In an interview, they compared Miyamoto to a shepherd, saying he led them as a shepherd would lead sheep. And that's a good thing, by the way, just to clarify. However, although they were closely monitored, the team actually had a lot of free rein over where to take the game. Miyamoto told them that although they were developing a Haunted Mansion game, they shouldn't feel constrained by the common tropes of the genre, and that they should develop more freely instead. He told them, "If you have a good time in development, it'll work out somehow." The team chastised him for this advice, but they didn't ignore it. The first element of the game that the team worked on was the ghost catching mechanic. You see, Luigi's Mansion was a game built around the GameCube, and in some respects the GameCube built around Luigi's Mansion. The two were inseparable, but now the team had the difficult task of, well, separating them. Unlike the GameCube controller, the 3DS only has a single analog stick, so the dual stick setup from the original game was out. Instead, they opted for a single stick setup, with 2 of the face buttons used to point the poltergust up or down. The controls weren't the only thing that had to be changed due to the 3DS. The graphics were also affected. You see, playing a video game on a large, bright television is a completely different experience to playing a game on a small and fairly dim screen. The original game's dark colour palette would just not be visible on the 3DS. Because of this, the choice was made to switch to a brighter, more colourful and cartoon-like visual style. Alas, there were more changes to come. You see, the open-ended, non-linear gameplay of the original game works well for longer play sessions, but not so well on a handheld console, where players tend to play for short sessions and then put the game down for a bit. Because of this, the choice was made to go with a more segmented structure, with a large number of short missions instead of one long one. The team also took on board feedback from the original game, namely that it wasn't long enough. to remedy this, they decided to have the game take place in not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 mansions. Now there could be no complaints about shortness. Throughout the development process, Miyamoto was constantly giving advice to the team. Not only vague advice about Japanese television, but also specific advice about elements of the game. For example, he worked closely with the team to get the right feel for the controls of Luigi. He also came up with many ideas for the game, such as the staircase boss in the stage tree topping. And with that, Luigi's Mansion was released unto the world. How did it do? How about 5.5 million copies? That's double the original game's. Does that mean it's a better game? Well, not really. It's a different game. While the original was an exploration of a haunted mansion, the sequel is more a series of ghost-catching missions. Different people prefer each game based on their personal preferences. However, regardless of your personal opinions of the game, these higher sales most likely influenced Nintendo's recent Luigi's Mansion craze. With a port of the original game for 3DS having been released last month, and a brand new entry to the series coming for Switch in 2019, the future of Luigi's Mansion has never looked brighter. Hey there, thanks for watching all the way through. I've never done any videos like this before, so any feedback is much appreciated. Also, if you liked this video, you might enjoy my future ones too. I hope so anyway. Right, that's all from me. Bye.